Hi guys, I'm Bobsy, and this video we're going to continue off from where we left off last time. Last time we finished animating the player and synchronizing it over the network. However, in this one we're going to be handling some of the basic level of shooting and the health of the player. But first, before we get into that, I just want to solve a little issue. You can see how I can see my own player body, which obviously I'm not too happy about. And it's actually pretty easy. What we have to do is we have to take the skinned mesh renderer and essentially just have it only cast shadows. Now, his hair is also a thing of its own. So what we're going to do is in the player controller, we're going to serialize a new list of renderers and we're going to set all of those to show shadow only if we are the owner. So I'm going to do a new list of type renderer. And I'm just going to call this renderers and set that equals to new. And now in here in the unspawned, we can do if we are the owner. We'll then for each through all of the renderers. I'm going to call them rend. I'm going to say rend.shadow casting mode equals to shadow casting mode shadows only. So now if we're the owner, we won't be able to see the body, but we can still see the shadow of the body and everybody else can still see us just fine. Also, I completely forgot to, of course, drag and drop the renderers in from earlier. That's my mistake. We're just going to take the root of the character here and I'm also going to grab his hair. There it is. I'm also going to drag that into the renderers like so. So you can see if I start now I can't see myself and this is already a lot nicer to move around with. Now let's get into the actual shooting, and first things first, I guess let's make a player health script because we need to be able to take some damage. So I'm going to call this player health. I'm going to drag and drop this onto our player character. Now let's open up the player health script, remove what's already in here, make it a network behavior, and let's get started. So first things first, let's just serialize some value that's going to be our default health. So I'm just going to do max health is 100. Or actually, since sync vars can already be serialized, let's just do a private sync var, which will be of type int. And this will be our health, and we'll serialize that to the default of 100. And there we go. Now this is serialized in editor. Now let's first of all, let's make a public getter. So let's just do public int health. And this is just so we can read it from anywhere, and that's going to be health.value. I'm pretty sure you can also just read it as .health. It'll automatically cast it to the type of int. Now let's just make some kind of method to change our health. So private void change health, and then we're going to do int amount, and we're just going to add that to our health. So health.value plus equals to amount. Now this sync var is right now server authed. And I think we want to keep it that because all players got to be able to shoot, well, all players basically, or at least they're going to be able to, damage each other and call damage on them and so on. So I think the easiest way to go about this right now is going to be just having the server handle it. So I'm going to do server C, require ownership is false, and there go. Now everyone can change everyone's health. Now obviously for cheating, this is bad, but as I mentioned in the beginning of the series, we don't care about cheating in this. Cool. Now let's go on to make a gun. Now I'm just going to make a new script and I'm just going to call this gun. And of course, this is going to be in network behavior as well. And now in the unspawned, I do want to disable it if we're not the owner. So or enabled equals to its owner, classic. And let's start by working on the raycasting as well. So one thing is we got to think about who do we want to be able to hit and who don't we want to be able to hit, right? So in this case, what we want to be able to hit is essentially everything that's not ourselves. And this is where we got to start working with layers a little bit. So as you can see right now with players, you can essentially hit this collider, which also means we'd be able to technically hit ourselves. But if we go to our layers, you can see here I've already made a player self layer and a player other layer on just layer 6 and layer 7. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the player health also change the layers recursively. So let's go up here to the very top and let's go into the unspawned. And I'm also going to make a private void method that we're going to call recursive, or I guess set layer recursive. And then I just send the game object through for the object that we want to change, and then int for the layer that we want to set it to. Now this is pretty easy. We set the game object's layer and then we iterate through all of its child objects and also set it on those. So in the unspawned, what we're going to do is we're first going to say which layer that we got to set it to. So I can just serialize this in the inspector as well, private int, and this will be self layer and other layer. And then we can simply just make a var for let's call it actual layer equals 2, and then if we are the owner, and this is essentially just a one-line if statement. So if we are the owner, that's what the question mark means. As essentially this is now an if statement. Now we've got to put in the true condition. So if we are the owner, we want to use the self layer. If we're not the owner, we want to use the other layer. And now we can call this set recursive with the game object as reference and the actual layer that we should be setting. And so if we go and press play now, we should see that our object and all child objects within should now automatically be set to, whoops, let me just go back here. And also actually we need to set the layers, of course. So self layer was 6, other layer was 7, I believe. Yes, 6 and 7. I'm gonna save that, hit play. And now let's go back into our player here and you can see we're now in the player self layer. And there we go. So now we're only rendering the shadow as you can see. And yeah, as I showed before, our character is now on the player self layer, and others that join will automatically be on the other player layer. Cool, so this works. This means that now if we go back into the gun, we can actually start handling the actual hitting. So first things first, I just want it to be on left mouse button we shoot. So I'm going to do if input dot get key down, and then we'll do keycode dot mouse 0. Now mouse 0 is the left mouse button, simple enough. Mouse 1 is the right mouse button. But what we can do is, instead of opening up the if statement like this and then start writing more code in here, we can actually invert this and just say return, because we're not going to be doing anything else. So in case we're not pressing the left mouse button, we just go back. Right, okay, great. So let's now also start with thinking about how do we want the raycast to happen. And if I just open good old trustworthy paint here, which I know some people get angry about, and that's fine by me. Let's say we have our player here. Where do we want to raycast from? Most games that actually handle shooting like this, they don't actually raycast from the gun. Let's say that we have our gun here. Most games don't actually raycast from here, because that can be hard for the player to see where it's actually shooting. So instead, what you typically do is you would take the camera, which let's just draw that as like this gray view. So this is essentially our view. And the raycast would then go from the center of our view and directly to the middle of where we're looking, and this is also where your crosshair would be. So let's try and do it like that. And what we need for this is we need a reference to the actual camera, at least the transform of the camera. So I'm going to go for transform, and this is going to be the camera transform. So now we can raycast from this. We also need the layers that we want to be able to hit. So let's do private layer mask, and this is going to be hit layer. And essentially, well, we could also use some kind of range. We could, of course, also just make it infinite, but I like having some kind of set range. I'm just going to do a range of 20 in this case. Now, my map is small, so we're probably never going to hit 20. But let's start doing the raycast. So let's do if physics.raycast, and then we raycast from the camera transform dot position, and we'll raycast from the in the direction of the camera transform dot forward. Then we want to output the hit, so we want to do out variable hit. This will essentially output the hit, so if we actually hit something, this hit will then be populated. And then we want to feed it the range, and we want to feed it the hit layer as well, so that we can only hit the layer. Now we could go inside the if statement like this again, but what we can also do is, once again, we can just invert it. So if we don't hit anything, we just return, because it's not very relevant if we don't hit anything. Cool. And now let's start by just logging out what we actually hit to confirm that this works. So let's just do hit, and then we do hit.transform.name. And there we go. Now we can log out what we actually hit. So let's go and set this up. So now if I go into the player, we can figure out where we want the gun script to be at. Now I know that the Cincy assets actually had a gun stuff already, a water pistol. So I'm going to drag that into the player. I'm going to position it about where I think I want it, which could be about here, maybe a little bit offset to the side, something like that, maybe a little bit more up. And yeah, this might be where I want the gun. And now let's just give it the gun script. There we go. I'm just going to drag this up to the top, and I want to be able to hit everything except for the player self layer. There we go. That's now taken off. And let's also feed it the camera transform so we know the direction. And let's try it out. So now we're in here. And if I click, let's say on the wall here, you can see it says that we hit the building column. If I press on this wall, we hit the cube. If I press on this one, we hit the ground. Press on this box, you can see we hit the prop crate. So yeah, things are working nicely. And if I have another player join now, just to confirm that those layers work too, let's try and walk over here to have that work. And then if I click, as you can see, I hit the player clone. So that means I've now hit the other player. Cool. Great, so this works. Now, one thing that you might notice is the gun isn't rotating up and down with us, which we very well might want. And this is obviously because it's not parented to the camera. Now, the thing is, we could just parent it to the camera, but the issue being we're actually disabling the Cinemachine camera. So what we could do instead is we could make an object that can mimic essentially what the camera is doing, or essentially mimic the rotation at least of the camera. So I think we should do that. The way that we do this, it's pretty easy. Let's make a new game object, and let's just call this camera mimic, like that. And then let's make a new script that I'll just call rotation mimic. This rotation mimic will be extremely simple. Essentially all it has to do is just mimic the rotation of some input object that we give it. So let's do private transform mimic object like this, and then it'll just set transform.rotation equals to the mimic object.rotation. And what we can also do is just, if the mimic object doesn't exist, if it's not populated, maybe we forgot something or it gets destroyed, then I don't want it calling a bunch of errors, so I'm just going to return. Cool. So let's take the camera mimic. Let's drag and drop the rotation mimic on here. Let's feed it the camera, and let's also set it at the exact same height as the camera, so that way they're in the same position, so they'll have the same pivot point. Then drag and drop the water pistol under that. So now let's hit play, and as you can see now it'll rotate up and down with us, which was what we wanted. And now in order to also have this sync, we can just have this camera mimic, give it a network transform, and we don't need to transform the scale or the parent Oh, for that sake, we do actually need to parent. I don't want to sync the rotation, or the position, sorry, but I do want to sync the rotation. So now if I have my other player here join, and there we go, now we can see his pistol. Yeah, you can see that it isn't actually moving up and down as it should. This is of course, this is of course because it's running for everyone. So let's do network behavior, and then let's do the classic on spawned, and then we'll just set enabled equals to is owner. Like that. And I don't want to use the is spawn with the bool. I want to use the one without the bool. Like that. Cool. So now it'll actually be disabled, meaning they won't be controlling each other's weapon rotation. And for good measure, let's also just remove the collider from the gun. We don't want players to accidentally shoot the gun and not actually hit the player. Well, maybe you do, but in my case, I don't. So now you can see that the gun rotates perfectly up and down as well. Later, we can also have the arms, of course, hold the gun, but I think this is a good start to just set up for our shooting, and you can see where other players are looking and so on. Now we should be able to shoot each other. Cool, this is already going very quick. Now in the gun, we now know that we can hit things successfully. So what we want to do is we want to check, is it a player that we're hitting? So let's do if hit dot transform or game object. Oh, sorry, hit dot transform dot target component. Can you do target component directly from a hit? Let me check. You cannot. Okay, we want to do target component and then out, and we want to try and get the player health. And this we just call the player health. And once again, as always, we can just invert this and return. So if we don't hit a player, we don't do anything. And now we can say the player health dot change health, and we can of course set some kind of damage variable as well. I'm going to do serialized field private int damage. I'm just going to set it to 10, and then I'm going to feed this negative damage. And there we go. Now we should change the health of the player that we're hitting. So now let's go give this a shot and also watch their sync var to see that it actually goes down because it's serializable. So this is the player that just joined. We can see that because we're not enabled here, and also you can see that the owner is not us because we would be owner ID 1. Now if we go down here, you can see the health is now 100, and if we go and shoot him, oh, there you go. Now you can see his health is 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, and so on. So now you can successfully damage him as well. I think this video has already been long enough. In some of the upcoming videos, we'll also look into the UI, so you can properly tell how much health that you have, and we can of course look into the game states of, you know, ending the round, restarting the round, ending the game, and tracking scores and so on. So we're going to do a lot more in the future, but hopefully this has been a good start and very helpful to you. I hope that you've enjoyed. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I see you in the next one, and I just hope that you have a wonderful day.